Hello, everybody. This is Karen Patterson with Revolution Group, and I really thank you all for joining us today. This is one of, just a number of webinars that we like to put out for our existing customers, just to share a lot of the great things that are going on with Plex, things that you need to be aware of, but there's always so many things going on that it's hard to keep up. So we just like to think about this like a conversation we might have if we were passing you in the hallway. So today we're going to talk about production corrections and that new process that has been rolled out by Plex. But I did want to take a minute just to let folks know who we are. I think that I probably know most of you, but did want to take the opportunity to let you know Revolution Group is a Plex partner. And in fact, we were the first Plex partner way back in 2002. And as you can see from our stats slide there, over that period of time, we've grown to nearly 22 dedicated Plex team members. That's from one way back in the good old days. So we have nearly 22 folks in our Plex group, and that includes our consultants and also our dev team. Just to make sure you are aware, we are one of the only partners who can develop additional screens for Plex and make modifications within the production environment, actually get them promoted to the production environment. To date, we have created about 250 production data sources, so that's also one of the things that we can do, and we have created about 400 applications. We work with around 50% of the Plex customer base, and each of our consultants we hire also bring with them many, many years of business experience. In fact, our consultants have an average of 20 years of manufacturing experience, be it in production control or plant managers, former controllers, former quality managers, as well as a number of folks that have direct supply chain experience in the Honda supply chain as well. So today, speaking with us today is Mandy Lindemuth. She is one of our consultants and in fact is a subject matter expert in all things finance in Plex. She's been with us a couple years, and we're really happy to have the opportunity to introduce her as she's going to share with you how to do production corrections. Take it away, Mandy.
Today we're going to go through the production corrections. It's a new enhancement that's come out from Plex. It's really not a difficult process. It's not a huge change, but it is a huge change as far as capabilities for us. It's something that people have been looking for a very long time from Plex. We've had the unship to correct the shipping errors. We've had unreceived to correct all the receiving errors. And now we have unproduced to correct production errors. We're going to start out with just the community announcement they put out. It really wasn't the announcement that normally goes out, so we wanted to call it out for everyone. If you go into the community and you type in production correction, you will get to this announcement where they kind of walk you through what they did, what they were thinking, and then there's some conversation below it of some testing that has been done for this process. There is a little bit of configuration that needs to be done to get this up and running. It's not one of those enhancements that's just turned on automatically. You do need to go into the production history and the production tracking module and turn on the production correction display setting. And then, of course, whomever you want to allow to be able to do this, you're going to need to go through some permissions depending on how you're put together as role-based or user permissions. There are several requirements that they have set up that when you go through and try to initiate a production correction that Plex is going to do on that container. And it's going to look at these key 7 validations on each container. And if one of these validations is violated, it will throw up an error and tell you which one is violated and that it cannot do the production correction as you requested. It's looking at the record date of the container and making sure that the container, when it was recorded, that period is still open and available. It's looking at the cost records and making sure that the cost records haven't been posted, and those are really kind of on an actual costing when you're using the JOCAR report. It's looking to make sure that these containers are still active. So if you're trying to do a correction on a container, it's got to be an active container. It needs not have any downstream trace records, so it can't be split, merged, consumed. Those are really kind of the downstream trace, and we'll discuss what I mean by that, because there are some other, what we would think is downstream being they've been shipped or they're sent over to a subcontractor, and we can still make corrections on those. So it's just something to be aware of. There shouldn't be any issue container cost records, which again flows with the actual costing. If you're posting JOCAR, this is something you want to pay attention to. The produced container must not be loaded as an output container, so that's kind of the bill and hold process that happens in Plex. And then the production quantity has to be greater than the container quantity. This kind of goes along with the old way of doing production corrections. And if you've went in and adjusted the production record already to reduce the amount produced, and then you try to do this process on the container, it's going to throw up an error and tell you enough in the production record to be able to do this correction. So these are just some requirements to keep in mind, and these are some of the validation checks that Plex has set up that it's looking at for every single container prior to doing the correction. So we're going to kind of walk you through just an example of, you know, a day in a life of, I'm going to correct a container. And the example I brought up is that I've produced 11 pieces at the control panel, and I have did the first quantity and just done the production and said, I think I've produced 11 pieces. And if you look at what we have done, producing these 11 pieces is going to consume these components in my example. So here is all my containers that I have loaded to the control panel that are the raw materials that produce this unit. I also, since I am the finance SME, SCAR is very important in this process. As we know, doing the other old way of doing the production corrections had some impact on SCAR. So curiosity had me, what is the impact on SCAR from doing these? We can see here that when we produce the 11 pieces, the standard cost transactions are produced, and we can see the 11 pieces coming through, creating all of our costing side of this transaction. Now the operator says, oh no, I only produced 10. Oops. And he notifies his supervisor to unproduce the container so they can reproduce it with the correct quantity. So from the control panel, they can do a menu search, or from the control panel, they can hit production history here and get to the production history, or they can do a menu search for production history, depending on, right, the permissions that are currently on that user at the control panel. When they do that, they're going to pull up the production history screen, and with that setting turned on, you're now going to see this correction button next to each one of the containers. So we would select our container that we wanted to correct, saying, oh, this shouldn't be here, this should be 10 pieces, so we're going to unproduce this whole container, and then at the control panel, we'll reproduce it later. So we would click the correction, and a verification will pop up asking us if this is what we really want to do. Do we want to unrecord the production? And we, of course, would click yes. There's some important notes to think about when you're doing this and when you're getting ready to click yes, is that the production correction feature was originally intended to unproduce a whole container for mistake. So the scope was kind of limited. It's really not to correct the quantity in the container. It's to really fully unproduce that container, and then you would go back and reproduce at the correct quantity. It doesn't currently limit the containers if you've loaded that container already to a shipper, It's going to let you unproduce it. So you really need to know where that container is at the time that you're doing this so that you know everything that you need to correct and all the impacts that are going to be done. The same thing as if it's been shipped to a subcontractor. It will still let you correct it if it's on the subcontractor's floor, so just keep that in the back of your mind. And it allows for the production correction, even if your supervisors or your employees are doing the old way of doing things, as long as that production record is higher than the quantity on the container. So if they've already went in and said, oh, I'm going to fix the production the old way of doing it, and then they say, wait, I can do it the new way, if that fix was higher, it's going to let them do this. So something just to keep in mind when you're getting into using this. When Plex undoes the production of the container, it's going to display a report of everything that it fixed and correct. So it's going to tell you the trace records, any adjustment or scrap records it undid, supply items it fixed, and any cost records. So the container trace records are really for looking at actual costing and looking at that container as it traces through in the depletion records. For the source containers, it is going to bring those back up to the quantity that they were before. It is going to put on the traceability a production correction that occurred, and it's going to tell you how many pieces it added back to the container. It should adjust the net and gross weight. And if the source container became inactive, it will reactivate it. It's going to look at the supply items and replace and adjust the quantity of all depleted supply items that occurred for that production. And then it's going to delete or update any rollover adjustments, container trace records, any lot trace, the item location, and then it's going to delete any usage for items or supply items. And then for the actual production record of the produced quantity, it's going to update the net weight. The last action is going to show a production correction, bringing this container to 0 because I'm fully unproducing the container. It's going to leverage the standard procedure of production delete. So this is what it's going through. It's deleting the operator record. It's deleting any tool production records, set logs, scrap logs, depletion logs, production correction, and then the production record itself. So it does go through a lot and do a lot of things. So those 7 checks that we discussed in the beginning are pretty important so that it can make sure it's ready for all this to occur after. We can go back and now we can look at the source and we can see that the source was increased back up to the quantity it was prior to us hitting produce. We also can regenerate SCAR, and we can see that all the cost transactions that occurred for those 11 pieces are now gone. They did not occur, so this gets rid of any of that cost effect that the old process of doing the production correction used to leave. The old way, you used to have to marry up the adjustments and the manufacturing variants to make sure everything tied out. Other important notes to consider is that any labor records that are associated with the container will still be associated. So that's kind of important on the actual costing side of the system, is that if there's labor records, you know, you're still going to see that labor that it took to produce and then reproduce. There is still visibility that the correction is made. As I showed you before in the history, in the traceability, you're going to see that line there that there was a production correction, and that's why the container either increased in value or was brought to 0. The process can be used for bin-to-bin, but the bin-to-bin container must be manually reactivated. And then, of course, the production record on the container where the quantity was produced, if that completed the job, this correction isn't going to go in and bring that job back to active. So you're going to manually have to go in and reactivate that job to reproduce that container. So how do you do this? How do you get it? As I discussed before, permissions is something you need to look at and make sure that you have the right permissions on people that you want to be able to do this and on the right, whether it's a supervisor or an operator. But to get the correction button to show up, you need to go into your production history group and turn on the production correction display setting in the production tracking module. So I took a snapshot kind of to show you where the module is, and if you just put production correction display up here in the setting name and zero everything else out, you'll be able to see it pop right up, and you can turn that on. Are there any questions? I must have done a great job explaining it.
We do have one question that came in. Is there a way to select multiple containers at this time? I ask because most of our finished products are in cases, so for every case created, we have a serial number in the system.
No, at this time there's not, but if you go out to that community post and add that to the bottom, they're actively watching that as people are starting to use this process, and he's documenting anything that anybody is seeing that they would like to be added, and he's getting a timeline set up for those.
We'll wait just a few minutes to see if we have any more questions come in. If you have a question, just type it into your control panel there. I have a question. I see that the WebEx is being recorded. Will this be available at a later date? Yes, I will send a message out here in the next few days to everyone with the link to the recording, so you will be able to reference this material. Does this work for serialized individuals?
Serialized individuals. If you could explain that a little more. Are they
So
individual containers? Okay.
That's serialized individuals in the individual pieces that are going into a container. I haven't seen any conversation that it's going to affect any of the data related to serialized individuals. So my off the cuff would be, I don't think so. But certainly, yeah, we could check on that forum post as well. This actually, you know, is a first pass at something that we waited for a really long time. I'm so excited that this is finally available for folks.
Okay, next question is, if a period is open and not displayed, can the production correction be made?
They would have to have soft close rights to be able to do that. In my testing, it allowed me, and I have soft close rights in my test PCN.
Okay. Without adjusting labor associated with the container, how will this affect the OEE report?
That is a good question. Well, really and truly, the container that was created, you know, did use the labor. And so we don't really want to take away those labor records because you do need to account for the time that the container was being created. And you would assume that the second container that was created is gonna be done very quickly. So the labor record staying in there would be correct from an OEE standpoint.
Yeah, there should just be a little additional time for them to get the correction done and then reproduce on the control panel.
Keep in mind also that this process is intended to be similar to an unship or an unreceive, where it's happening. It's not really intended to be used 3 days later. It's intended to be used when the mistake is realized at the control panel. Because the farther away you get from actually making that correction using this tool, the less accurate it's going to be, and you're going to run into more of those seven issues that Mandy pointed out.
Okay. Does the production correction work for customers still using the material module of Plex? We have coils in the material module versus part module. Does it update the quantity correctly as one coil, or update the weights?
According to the documentation, and I didn't test using the material module, but according to the documentation and the other comments that are out there on the community post, it accurately updates the weights and whatever the quantity that you're tracking.
In the material module, Mandy?
Yes, there were some comments out there where people were testing both sides of the system, material module and the parts, and the material module was updating the weights and quantities correctly. But again, I prefaced that I did not test that myself. I'm going off of some comments that were out there in the community from some reliable customers that are out there that were doing testing too.
We did get a question about piece serialization, but I think we answered that with the individual
yes.
answer. How does this impact efficiency?
Again, I think that's the OEE. And being the OEE, you're going to see the labor come through, and you'll probably see a little more additional in the efficiencies of the machine and the labor, because you're occupying it just for a little bit longer to get the correction made and then reproduce the container at the control panel.
Okay, since this still shows a production, will it affect any production history reporting?
As it still shows production, it will undo the production. So depending on what reporting you're trying to look at, the container that was originally produced will be out of production history. You'll be able to query that container and see that a production correction was done on it, but you would turn around and reproduce a brand new container that would show up in your production history and on your records of your job.
So it actually removes the container from production history?
Yes.
Okay, if the container is tied to a master, does it remove the container number from the master unit?
It would not remove the container number. It makes it with a 0 quantity.
Okay. Does this work for scrap records as well?
It will
Meaning,
undo
can you uncorrect? I'm sorry, Mandy.
That's okay. It will undo the scrap if there was scrap that was done. But I guess I would need more clarification of what they're trying to understand.
Okay, we'll see if they type any more questions then. Will this add yield back on the control panel?
Mm-hmm. It should, because it's updating the source containers back, and I would want to test it because I've seen some interesting things with the yield calculation, but I would be surprised if Plex didn't take that into account
I know
when recalculating the yield.
On the test that I have run, we have yield on our source containers, and the yield was updated and put back to prior to the same percentage as prior to the production being created.
Perfect.
What will the adjustment show as in the transaction records for the backflush to source inventory?
On the source inventory, you will be able to see production correction and then the quantity coming back on to the containers. There is no adjustment. Go ahead, Karen.
Did you have a screenshot of that?
Yes. I don't know how to go backwards.
You should be able to go down into the lower left corner and you should see arrows there.
So here you see production correction that occurs, and it's adding back the quantity onto the container for the source. There is no an adjustment reason code if that's what they're asking, because there's no financial. It's just undoing the transaction that actually produced it. So the release of the quantity and then the add back of the quantity net to 0 as far as an inventory adjustment is concerned.
Will the labor records be attached to the new container? I ask because we are actual costing and we look at production costs in order to price our commodities.
That I did not test. I didn't go in and dig into. My gut tells me that no, the labor records will still be tied to the old container, and then the new container will have the labor record for the additional few seconds it took to reproduce. But for the actual costing side of the system, the labor records remain there.
Yeah, and that's what the documentation said too.
Yeah, but I didn't validate that, so I just want to preface that with, I didn't go in and validate that piece of it.
When will these changes take place?
As soon as you turn the capabilities on and you hit production correction, it happens immediately.
Yeah, and this modification is rolled out. It has been since for a couple weeks now.
I think since the beginning of the year, it's been turned on. Here is the add date of the setting. So all you have to do is go in here and go into your customer or your module settings and query for production correction display and turn that on, and then adjust your permissions as needed. And then as soon as you make a correction, that's when it occurs.
Okay. What do you see on the labor record when a correction is made?
There is no change on the labor records. The labor records stay the same. So that you'll see the original container and then you'll see the new container. The original container obviously will have a quantity of 0, but it will still have the labor records attached to it as far as how long it took them to produce it.
Would this process update the production and efficiency report too?
Well, it's updating the records that are used to create those reports. So I think, you know, without taking a look at that report specifically, and I'm sure you didn't look at that report, did you, Mandy?
No.
Yeah, so I would say that the records that are being used to create it are being affected. So I would expect that it would be correct, but we would want to test that.
Okay, for us, it takes several shifts to complete a container. If the container is undone a few shifts later, what will historical records for the operators for those past shifts show?
With the labor records remaining, if that's what you're looking at is the labor side of it, then those records should remain there.
Yeah, but on the production records,
on the production side of it, they'll be gone because it's removing that production, and then you will only see that container just appear with a new quantity, the new container.
Okay. Want to confirm what was said about the labor records. If it was reported a container of 11 pieces, which was then corrected to 10 pieces, will the labor record for the employee show 10 pieces?
It will show on the labor record will show on the original container for however long it needs. So if it took him an hour to produce all 10 of those pieces, then you will have an hour's worth of labor attached to that original container. And then you'll have, if it took him 5 minutes to make the correction, when the new container is put in, you'll have 5 minutes of labor on the new container with a quantity of 10.
Will this also correct the production recorded on the Work Center log?
Yes.
Are there any issues with using this with cell production?
There shouldn't be. I would think that the only thing that you're going to see on cell production is standard cost transactions, and those are all removed. Source should be managed just fine. So I would not expect that there are any issues there.
Okay. Would a fix for labor records be that we merge the old container with the new container to capture all costs?
Would that be one of the transactions that would preclude it from being able to be unproduced? I think is probably the question.
I think they're wondering, after they do the production correction, can they merge the zero valued container into the new container so the labor records would merge onto the new container?
Oh.
I would have to look into that deeper to make sure that it moves those labor records onto the container and what reports that you're trying to see that on.
If you're interested in exploring that more, I would reach out to your solution, your ERP strategy consultant, or put in a service. Just, go ahead and submit the question, and we'll try to get that resolved. Does the unproduced correction button work to unscrap parts?
That's a great question. I did not test that. So I'm assuming what the question is, right, you, at the control panel, you have two containers. One is a scrap container, one is a production container. And now you've reviewed that scrap container and you've decided that everything in there is okay. So you want to unproduce it and then reproduce it as a good container so it fixes your scrap report. That would be awesome. I would have to test that to make sure. I did not try to unproduce a scrap container, but that is a great question, and I will test that, and I will post something out there to let you know if that works.
Yeah, I mean, actually, if you just let us know who asked that question, we'll be happy to follow up on that, because that would be awesome.
That would be awesome. That would solve a couple problems.
Mm-hmm.
Does the corrected container get inactivated when the production is undone?
They, in the documentation, it says it does. When I looked at my container after I did unproduce, it was still active. So I can't answer that fully in saying that yes, it does, because the documentation says it does, but every one that I unproduced was a zero valued container but still active.
That could have a lot to do with the setting of set zero quantity containers to inactive. And I'm not sure what that's set to in our PCN, but that would be easy to test and to take a look at.
Yep.
Okay, I try to get to all the questions. I'm going to wait just a few seconds here to see if any more come in. If I didn't answer your question, please resubmit it, and we'll see if we can get it answered for you.
Yeah, and just to add a little clarity here, Mandy did some testing with it on this, as well as a couple of our other consultants. Really, our intent here is to make sure that you are aware of the functionality, and we're happy to follow up on a lot of the issues that were raised, or work with you guys on specific issues. We were not directly involved with the development of this, and so we're going by our testing and our experience in working with it. So hopefully, and it's very interesting to me to speak with a group of folks, and really it amazes me and reminds me every time how different every implementation of Plex can be, and how many twists and turns it can take. So so hopefully we've been able to help and answer most of your questions, and we're happy to follow up on anything that remains outstanding.
Got just a couple more in. Does this work with multi-outs?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, there has been some testing done. I specifically didn't have a multi-out part, but read through, and there was some very high remarks on how well it worked with multi-outs.
When you post the correction, does the system issue a new serial number for the container?
Yes. For the new produced container, you will get a new serial number. For the corrected container, it just takes that original serial number and takes it to 0. I figured there would be a lot of questions just by how specific everybody's configuration of Plex is. So feel free, and I'll try as best I can. There's so many different ways everybody uses everything, so there are several, as you've seen, several ways I didn't test it.
I think that's it. I haven't had any more questions come in.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, I don't think we put any email addresses up there, but I am Kay Patterson at revolutiongroup.com. We'd be happy to help anybody with this or any other business processes or issues that you guys have going on. So I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you guys, and I look forward to bringing you the next new thing. Thank you all very much, and have a good afternoon. Oh, more?
I did get one final, just to reiterate, we will have the presentation online here either this afternoon or tomorrow, and I will send out a link to everyone who has attended, so look for that email from Ruthie Sloan, and that will give you a link to the presentation. And I think that is it.
Wonderful. Thank you all.